Most of the men we remember as the Founding Fathers were part of a high society establishment. Washington was a wealthy Virginia planter. Jefferson and Madison were landed aristocrats. These were men with elite educations who were deeply invested in the existing social order. Thomas Paine was the exact opposite. He arrived in America in 1774 as a 37-year-old failure. He was a bankrupt, twice-divorced corset maker with no formal education past the age of 12. He had no fortune, no title, and almost no prospects. At that time, the political situation was a stalemate. Even as tensions rose, the colonial elite were terrified of a total break from Britain. They weren't looking for independence. They were desperately seeking a way to reconcile with King George and return to the status quo. So how did a penniless immigrant who had been in the colonies for barely a year manage to shatter that stalemate and convince a continent to risk everything on a revolution? He lacked the decades of personal loyalty and social pressure that bound the colonial gentry to the British crown. To an outsider, the logic of independence was simple, making his complete lack of a stake in the old system his greatest political advantage. In January 1776, Paine published Common Sense, attacking monarchy as an absurdity. He mocked the notion that political wisdom could be inherited. He avoided Latin phrases and legal jargon, writing in plain English that ordinary farmers and shopkeepers could understand in a single sitting. This chart shows how Common Sense became the first truly viral document. In a population of 2.5 million, it sold 150,000 copies. To match that per capita reach today, a book would have to sell tens of millions of copies. Despite its massive success, Paine refused to take any royalties. He walked away from a fortune, donating every cent of his profits to buy mittens and supplies for the freezing Continental Army. He followed this with The Crisis, a series of papers meant to rally a demoralized army. General Washington was so moved that he ordered it read aloud to his troops right before their famous crossing of the Delaware River. Paine had done more than write a pamphlet. He had proved that the right words, delivered in a language the public could actually understand, could sustain an entire revolution. After the American victory, Paine didn't stay to reap the rewards. He returned to Europe, drawn to the smoke and chaos of the French Revolution. He published Rights of Man to defend the French uprising, but he used the book to propose ideas far ahead of his time, including a progressive tax system, public education for the poor, and financial support for the elderly. It created a bizarre situation. While the British government was charging him with sedition and trying to arrest him, the French were electing him to their national legislature, even though he spoke almost no French. But his refusal to compromise soon backfired. In the middle of the revolutionary fever in Paris, Paine openly voted against executing King Louis XVI, arguing that the revolution should kill the office of monarchy, not the man. That stand for principle over partisan bloodlust cost him his popularity. By prioritizing objective justice over the whims of the mob, he turned his own allies into enemies. In late 1793, the French government arrested him. Paine spent nearly a year in a stone dungeon during the Reign of Terror, narrowly avoiding the guillotine while others in his political circle were executed daily. While locked away and facing a likely death sentence, he applied his blunt logic to a third institution that he believed held too much power over the human mind: organized religion. In The Age of Reason, he argued for deism, a belief in a rational creator who does not intervene in the world. He attacked the authority of Scripture and the institutional church, calling for a faith based on observation and reason rather than miracles. Attacking a king had made him a hero to the common man, but in the 18th century, attacking the Bible was a step that most people weren't ready to take. The book permanently branded him an outcast in the eyes of the public. Paine returned to America in 1802 at the invitation of Thomas Jefferson, but the country he helped create had changed. Because of his religious writings, the man who once rallied the Continental Army was now treated as a pariah. The ironies of his final years were bitter. Former friends wouldn't be seen with him, and in New Rochelle, he was even denied the right to vote, the very right he had done so much to secure for others. He died in poverty in 1809. There were no grand state funerals or long processions. Only 6 people attended his burial. The final insult came a decade later when an admirer dug up his remains to take them to England for a memorial. The plan failed, and his bones were eventually lost, leaving the man who inspired a continent without a grave. Thomas Paine was a man uniquely suited for the friction of revolution. His uncompromising nature was essential for breaking an old world apart, but it made him entirely incompatible with the compromises of the new one. Throughout the 19th century, historians actively worked to minimize Paine's role in the revolution. They preferred a sanitized version of history that centered on the landed elite, trying to keep his radical ideas out of the textbooks. Yet his core principles, that government exists only by the consent of the people, and that political debate belongs to the public, quietly redefined the way modern nations are governed. America tried its hardest to forget Thomas Paine the man, but we are all still living in the world his words made possible.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us.